Welcome. You are listening to Solution Space on WRFG Atlanta. My name is Adam Wadley. You can find some supplementary materials to this program by going to wrfg.org and finding the Solution Space page by navigating through the schedule. With that being said, let's get started. I don't have an invocation in front of me to work with. I have been using my telephone to record videos of these radio shows as well, so I can't be looking at my phone. So I guess we'll start with an invocation. It's coming from a text that I'm gonna be talking about anyway, but so we're bridging the divide here between the sacred and the profane. I'm gonna read you some passages, I guess, by Jean Baudrillard, where he's talking about this concept that he calls non-Euclidean. So Euclidean is like a kind of geometry. It's the kind of normal kind of geometry that we always think about, I guess. It's defined, for example, by one thing, that parallel lines never hit each other, right? On a flat piece of paper, you can draw two parallel lines and you can make them go on forever and they'll never hit each other. But if you draw two parallel lines on a curved surface. So for example, I always get longitude and latitude confused, don't you? But I guess it's the longitudes, the ones that go north to south. Those lines on the Earth, they converge at the poles, right? So they're parallel, but they hit together because they're on a curved surface. But that's an example of a non-Euclidean geometry. So Baudrillard's talking about this, and he's basically using it as a way of talking about how, we're leaving. Kansas is going bye-bye, right? We're entering the weirdening. I don't know how else to talk about it, although that's what I'm going to be talking about this whole time. So let's see here. Here's my invocation. Jean Baudrillard writes, "In fact, to describe this anthropological break, where all old values are obsolete and where all events take on another meaning, we would have to introduce the idea of a non-Euclidean space, the space of hegemonic world power, with its unprecedented machinery, but also the space of another type of events of another order than historical events, unpredictable events, without continuity or reference, which are the radical sign of a counterpower at work." So with that being said, welcome to the Rogue Event. And I invoke all sentient beings and everybody listening, everybody not listening, everything that can't hear me. I invoke everything as a rogue event. May we all appreciate things as such. So, with that being said, on this week's program, I want to talk about that. Jean Baudrillard talking about non-Euclidean space, the non-Euclidean, transformation. And I'm going to be connecting it with, two other things mainly. There's obviously always a lot on my mind, but you have heard me on a previous show connect together the topics of Ben Zweibelson and Afropessimism. So Afropessimism is a community of, it's a tendency in thought, I guess I would say, but it's represented by a community of academics. So I've mentioned Frank Wilderson III before, but there's also, Hortense Spillers. Orlando Patterson is one of the progenitors of that, and David Marriott, even right here at Emory University in Atlanta. Calvin Warren is another major figure within Afropessimism, and is also at Emory University. So Afropessimism is a tendency of thought which is well represented actually here in the Atlanta area, and I'm excited. I think I'm going to be meeting up with a scholar of Afropessimism, Andrew Santana Kaplan, who I have read. I've read from his essay before on hauntology and Black messianicity. I can't remember the whole title right now, but our meeting keeps getting a little bit delayed. But I have some confidence that in the next couple of weeks I'll be able to sit down with Andrew Kaplan and continue to deepen my engagement with Afropessimism. So I want to connect the themes of Afropessimism, which I haven't really introduced here yet, but it is a tendency of thought which is looking at and analyzing anti-Blackness. I think one of the ways it's described, at least by Frank Wilderson III, is that it is a diagnosis of Black suffering. So this is a tendency I've mentioned before, but hopefully, for people who have called in over the past, or the one specific caller has called in over the past couple of weeks and has been emphasizing, the importance of white supremacy in terms of for us to be thinking about. I was talking about sort of an erotic emergency that we're all going through, where we don't know how to get along with each other, not just in terms of dating, but in terms of being generative more broadly, especially if you want to think about our time period as being one which, where the world is pregnant in a way and we can't give birth. Or, you could take it even further, we're infertile, not just in the sense where, people are tracking, how many people are being born and being dying, but, I think many people can sense that a way of the world is coming to an end. And what's going to come in the place of that? Is there something new which can be born in this time where, the rules-based international order might be going bye-bye, or, so many of the ways that we think about things are going away. This is obviously something that we argue about a lot. And I think a lot of the manifestations within the culture war basically have to do with trying to preserve the idea of a Euclidean thinking. So to explain what that means, I'm actually going to tie in with Ben Zweibelson. So Ben Zweibelson is a white dude within the Space Force. He is I don't know if he's the equivalent of like a general or something, but he's like an officer. He's the director of the Strategic Innovation Group within the Space Force. And so Ben Zweibelson makes it his mission to try and help the military change its thinking. And funnily enough, given that I want to connect him with Afropessimism, Ben Zweibelson's second book is called Beyond the Pale. And I'm going to be reading from it this week. So I think the title of Beyond the Pale is very entertaining. Or at least, it tickles my poetic funny bone, because Ben Zweibelson is talking about it in the sense of actually relating to the colonization of Ireland by England or by Britain or something like that, where, or maybe it's Scotland. I forget. I really apologize. But anyway, the point is, there would be a sort of the safe space, right, for the empire, right, and then there was, a place beyond, right? So here lie monsters type of situation. And so what they would do to distinguish between, the space which had been safely colonized or dominated, and then the other space, where the power of the empire wasn't as strong, right? They would dig a ditch, and where they happened to be, when you dug a ditch like that, it would create a sort of pale space where it would just be a clear demarcation in the ground, and it would be lighter. And so to be beyond the pale would mean that you had left the safe confines of the imperial space, and you had gone out. And so when people would come back, you'd be skeptical. Maybe you heard some new ideas. Maybe people would just be very mistrustful of things that came from beyond the pale. But of course, it's also very there's a clear double meaning if we apply this also to Afropessimism, beyond the pale in the sense of pale face, right? Beyond whiteness, in other words. So, I'm going to be getting into some of these discussions. I feel like they are highly relevant as, we look around the world and, we have all sorts of disagreements going on about, our concepts and how do we think about the world and what really exists, and so on and so forth. And so I find that the, thinking about this idea that Zweibelson's talking about in terms of a Newtonian way of thinking about the world, or, as Baudrillard puts it, being used to a Euclidean way of looking at the world. And now we're moving into a non-Newtonian, non-Euclidean space where, things are radically uncertain. We are coming unmoored. And we face the fact that, it's not just that there's order in the world and every once in a while there's disorder. and then we come back to order, and we figure out how what normal is again. But really, we're entering a space where there is no normal, right? Kansas is going bye-bye, right? And this is something which is going to have to be internalized within the heights of power, quote unquote. So you see here, the military, intelligence, corporate places, as I've been mentioning over the past several weeks and throughout, I don't know, the last third of my life or whatever. But so these are this sorts of not necessarily understandings. That's kind of a charged word in this atmosphere, because understanding implies like, oh, well, I understand what's going on. I can bring order to it in my mind. So, but this sort of sensibility, if you want to put it that way, so I'm trying to say, this has more of an intuition, and this is a disposition. This is something which is always with us. It's a kind of mood, or it's a kind of treatment that we're bringing to the world. Anyway, this sort of sensibility, this is going to have to go to the hearts of the CIA, not just the CIA director, but like whoever's really calling some shots. So not just Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, but this sort of understanding is going to have to pervade the entire power structure. Your George Soroses, if you will, your Tucker Carlsons, your Elon Musks. Everybody's going to have to get into their mind that we are entering a space of confusion, indeterminacy, and it doesn't necessarily mean anybody in particular is wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nobody that you have to listen to because this is happening. But the sooner that we can all get on board with this, the sooner we can stop clinging to an idea that we wish want a well-ordered world, and that everything's figured out. And of course we know this and that. We should much more so be in the mindset of like, yeah, this is a mystery. Obviously, we have a lot of concepts and categories and organization that we're bringing to this stuff, but when it comes to the simple truth about the world, the simplest truth about the world is that it can't be said simply, right? There's no one correct and absolute perspective on it. So to get into the non-absolutism of Jainism and so on and so forth. But anyway, we are coming up here on the first break that I'm going to take. At that point, I will then start to read you some quotes. But, this mentality, connecting Ben Zweibelson with his idea of Newtonianism, and how the Newtonian way of looking at things is not adequate to dealing with a situation which is complex, or, grasping the fact that, we have to deal with chaos, right? And so this connects with Baudrillard, non-Euclidean. We're sort of leaving a coordinate system that we're familiar with. And this ties in straight in with Afropessimism, talking about the end of the world, and what that end of the world, so much of it has to do with, what the idea of anti-blackness is within Afropessimism, has to do with the idea that white people, or the civilization, it is common under quote unquote civilization as influenced by European colonialism, that our simple rules have never really been adequate to understanding the world. And so the way that white people, or civilization, since a certain point, since the advent of the triangle trade, and there's a lot of history, people do a lot of history of anti-blackness that I'm still learning about. But the idea is that it is very habitual at the current moment and in our historical period to deal with the fact that we don't really know how what to say, that our ideas don't really work out. Things are never as simple as we want them to be, and so this causes us a lot of stress. And so the idea is that under white society, white civilization, this sort of stress is projected onto black people and black people's bodies. And so in anti-black violence, what is attempted to be done is to like destroy, or basically torture those aspects of experience that won't go along with our dogmas and our set ideas. So with that being said, we are going to have to take a little bit of a break, because as you know, here at WRFG, we hawk and merch.
Support Support WRFG by purchasing merchandise from our new online store. WRFG t-shirts, hoodies, tote bags, and more are available for sale at WRFG.org. Take this opportunity to adorn your beautiful self with merchandise from your favorite community radio station for progressive information and quality campaigns. To purchase WRFG merchandise, please visit WRFG.org.
Welcome back to Solution Space. You can find supplementary materials to Solution Space by navigating to the Solution Space page on WRFG.org. Sorry, I couldn't decide if I was going to say org or org, and that's what you got. Anyway, so yeah, principally at that site, at the Solution Space page on WRFG, you can find a link to the Substack that I curate. The Substack is called Experimental Unit. I've talked about this idea of experimental unit before on the program. It's related to the topics that I'm talking about today. Experimental unit for me is basically my projection of an informal organization of people who are applying the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. So if you would like to join Experimental Unit or learn more about it, you can find that stuff out by reading on the Substack, which again, you can find a link to on WRFG.org. Find the Solution Space page through the schedule. So I've already been through the first part of this program with the opening monologue, I guess. So I've sort of set the stage. So if you would like to call in and join this conversation, I would be most eternally grateful if you would do so. The telephone number to call here is 404-523-8989. Again, that's 404-523-8989. So let's get into some prompts, right? So I'm curious, is there anybody out there who has experienced that things are getting weird? You know, it's not just, uh-oh, the rise of fascism, or uh-oh, the rise of communism, or something like that. It's not quite that simple. We like to reach for these sorts of categories and project some sort of enemy. But isn't it also the case that things are just getting weird? What do you think about that? So feel free to call in if you'd like to discuss that sort of topic or anything else related to the matters I'm discussing. Again, the telephone number, 404-523-8989. All right, so I'm going to go through a few quotes here by Ben Zweibelson from his book, Beyond the Pale. You can, one of the things that I published on Substack just now was a couple of links. I ran out of time, but I did put links to Ben Zweibelson's book, Beyond the Pale, as well as to a collection of quotes I made about non-Euclidean ideas in Baudrillard. But so you can find Beyond the Pale through the Experimental Unit Substack, and these are quotes from that book. So Ben Zweibelson's writing that, let's just get into it. This is a quote from Ben Zweibelson. Okay. Modern military organizations operate in a centralized hierarchical structure that pulls information requirements from subordinate levels while pushing direction and decisions from higher levels downward. Today, militaries associate the centralized hierarchical form with how they categorize complex reality into a Newtonian-styled hierarchical and causal relationship of strategic, operational, and tactical levels for war. Tactical units form the base of the organizational pyramid, where the large population of subordinate participants in a military organization conduct localized, tactical, technical, and immediate actions, directed action in specific time and space, proximate to that unit's role, responsibility, and specialization. This operations construct is introduced at the onset of military education and training so that military professionals view it as a natural order of things. Except at higher levels of leadership development and education, participants do not consider the scaling of role, responsibility, and organizational purpose in the broader military institutional form and function for warfighting. So what I'm trying to emphasize by citing this part of Ben Zweibelson. So Ben Zweibelson, he's inside the military, right? So I think it's so interesting to put this perspective together with Afropessimism, or, together with, so many of us who, we perceive the military as, somebody else. The military is the big bad people, right, who are coming to like oppress us or something. But here's Ben Zweibelson, he's sitting in the military and he's trying to talk to the military about how its own thinking is too simplified. So one of the things that he's saying here, one of the things that I really enjoyed, was that he says, except at higher levels of leadership development and education. What he's basically saying is that people at the lower levels of military organization are basically trained to be grunts, right? Like, you are trained to carry out orders, and you are not necessarily trained to question the scope, to question the understanding of the people who are giving you orders, right? Because, of course, within a military, we have this whole thing called the chain of command, right? And so, I mean, what's another example of the chain of command but master-slave, right? So it is very controversial, I guess, for me to, start talking and start drawing comparisons between, Ben Zweibelson's thinking in terms of the ongoing revolution in military affairs and connecting that with Afropessimism, because a big aspect of Afropessimism is that basically the failure of analogy, that you can't compare, black suffering to non-black suffering. That's a big aspect of it. And also within Afropessimism, there's a big, I don't know if I should say identification, but there's a big connection between blackness and slaveness. So for an Afropessimist, for me to start saying how, the military is basically, making grunts, it's making people who don't understand how to really question the orders that they're given. And in a sense, this is a form of slavery, is what I'm saying. And there's all other, forms of, comparisons to slavery that people have made. Abraham Lincoln even invoked the concept of wage slavery, right? And so, there's obviously many times the idea of slavery has been invoked. I think part of what Afropessimism is trying to do is to say that, look at how often black suffering is being used to, portray something that's real bad, right? It's like, well, if, we don't want to be slaves. We don't want to be like black people, right? So anyway, I'm, like I said, still learning and still learning to engage, but, I am, as far as my intuition goes at the moment, I'm very, sympathetic and understand that I have a lot to learn from Afropessimist scholars and black thinkers and things of that nature. But I'm also interested in applying this in a particular way because, for me, what is most relevant, for example, Afropessimism talks about the end of the world, right? And so the end of the world is something good within Afropessimism because the world is understood as what I'm going to say is sort of like a Newtonian, a Euclidean way of understanding things, which is put together by white people. Or put together by, quote unquote, civilization. And the way in which that we understand that is now definitively influenced by anti-blackness ever since, again, advent of triangle trade and, especially within the United States of America, chattel slavery and so on and so forth. The connection of the status of being a chattel slave, and the lack of legal protection and so on, and that being associated with black skin. But so, the end of the world is just sort of the end of that sort of white understanding. The idea that, Western civilization or, a wider imperial civilization, which is now based on Western imperialism, because of course Western imperialism has thoroughly, we could say impregnated or influenced everything around the world. So everything around the world is also colored, if you will, by this sense of anti-blackness. And so the end of the world means, the sweeping away of these pretenses of order, which can only be held together within the minds of grunts, right, or something like that, within empire, right, by projecting all of the ways in which our ideas are too simple onto black people and then torturing black people. That's basically the idea. But so when it comes to the end of the world, we can also speak much more concretely, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, but we can talk about things like nuclear war. We can talk about things like artificial intelligence. We can talk about civil war, right? We can talk about how chains of command are coming unraveled. And so what I'm interested in doing is tying together these things and showing how, so much of the risk that we face and the threat of, the annihilation of everyone, this is so tied together with our inability to let go of old ideas. And so here in this quote, recall this has been a long time since I've been reading Ben Zweibelson, but so he's talking about how, militaries have this centralized hierarchical form associated with the Newtonian style. And he's talking about how, people up in the higher echelons of the military are taught more flexible ways to think, but not people in the lower echelons of the military. And so I would extend that right to wider society. And at the same time, we also have to, what to say? I want to be careful to say, like, Ben Zweibelson's talking about, people higher levels of the military basically, have more flexible. They're at least open to the idea of questioning this idea of, the simple hierarchical relationship. But, from the perspective of Afropessimism, or just from the perspective of, a critical philosophy or something like that, they're still not flexible enough, right? Because one of the things, which is, I'm going to get into another quote here in a second, but, one of the things that we really need to be questioning right now in particular is, what is war? Why does it make sense that, the CIA or the NSA or the ODNI or, for that matter, the Chinese MSS or, all these different armies and the FSB, all these different armies and intelligence, does it even really make sense at the top level to be oriented around this idea of warfare? Like, and, is that really what we're trying to do? Like, if we're trying to protect our people or protect our way of life and flourishing and stuff like that, to do that, do we have to win a war against everybody who disagrees with us or something like that? I would say basically no, right? Like the very idea of war, the simplistic idea where, there is a war. And like first we have peace and then we have war and then the war is over and then we have peace again. This is very similar to the idea that, well, usually there's order, right? And then it's punctuated by times of disorder. Couldn't find my car keys. I got overstimulated in public and now I'm having a panic attack, but then the panic attack is over. It's like, one of the things Afropessimism is basically trying to do is reframe and be like, and this is, me talking about my understanding. If you, have an issue with me, the way I'm talking about this, I encourage you to call in. Again, 404-523-8989. But, the Afropessimist perspective might say something more like, for a black person, it's all panic attack. Oops, all panic attack, right? Because there is no, sense of order. Because the idea in Afropessimism is that the way that the people of the world, right, which is to say non-black people, the way that we hallucinate our sense of order, our sense of security, is by again, projecting what's called ontological terror. So that sort of refers to like the terrifying fact that, the ways that we think about the world are not adequate. It's not just that like we're wrong, we need better ideas, but like the world is not commensurable with thought, right? The world is beyond words. It's beyond our little systems. Now, aside from the inadequacy of names, I've got a break in here to tell you that you're listening to Solution Space here on WRFG Atlanta. My name's Adam Wadley, and I've also created a project associated with Solution Space called Experimental Unit. You can learn more about Experimental Unit and find links to all sorts of web presences that I have set up by going to wrfg.org and clicking at the top of the page, the program schedule. Scroll down to Thursday, and you will see Solution Space. So once you find the Solution Space page on wrfg.org, that has a link there to my Substack, and that Substack has links to all other sorts of things. So, with that being said, I'm going to continue now with another quote by Ben Zweibelson. Ben Zweibelson writes, integrating a new paradigm for decision-making is no easy task, as organizations that fixate on using mechanistic, linear causal, and oversimplified frameworks are ill-prepared to receive concepts that are disruptive and paradoxical to the original frame. Further, as noted by Riddle and Weber, the professional, cognitive, and occupational styles that were refined in the first half of the 20th century, based in Newtonian mechanistic physics, are not readily adapted to contemporary conceptions of interacting open systems. Subsequently, many foundational concepts offered by complexity and systems theory are either non-existent or poorly translated in current military doctrine, training, and education. Militaries paradoxically exhibit strong scientific qualities that are in tension with bureaucratic and ritualistic practices that collectively form the modern military institution. The military institution prefers particular theories over others, and its core belief system will exclude those that threaten to disrupt or even dismantle concepts including identity, meaning, value, or other socialized military norms. I mean, when I read this, I can't help but see the strong ties to, things like Afropessimism. Basically, the idea here is that, there's what's called cognitive rigidity. You can look that up. That basically just means you get stuck in your ways, right? You are in a rut. You have a very dogmatic idea of what is going on. And so lots of us, when we're faced with complexity, right, we're faced with an uncertain situation. Every day, there's new headlines. Every day, there's more to worry about, right? There's wars rising all over the world. The internal social fabric of the quote-unquote United States of America is tearing apart, right? For many people's perspective, dogs and cats are lying down together, right? You can either say, oh, wow, we got the rise of the far right. We got ethno-nationalism. We got the rise of Nazism again. And I already mentioned fascism. But, people wonder, where's that coming from? There's a lack of understanding. Why is Donald Trump popular? We're still trying to answer this question. 8 years. It's been 8 years, if you can believe it. Well, I mean, it's even been 9 because this whole thing, well, anyway, that aspect of the weirding, really got started in 2015. But anyway, and on the other hand, you have people who are hyper concerned about wokeness, right? And hyper concerned about, the idea of the destabilization of so many of the old ways that we think about things in terms of like the gender or sex binary, men and women. And now this is something which is being questioned. This has been in the news this week because there was I don't know if it was a middle schooler or a young high schooler who was attacked at school. And this was associated with them being non-binary. And this person later died, right? And similarly, we can also look at, there's a continuing drumbeat of anti-black violence and black people and just extrajudicial killing by the police. And the ongoing conflict with Israel, Palestine, Hamas, and which opens up questions about religion and what is violence and what is legitimate political activity, and there's a lot of complexity here, right? There's a lot of complexity, and it's not, and the whole situation taken in aggregate is not something that one person can really get your hands on, right? Like let me be clear. There's lots of ways in which I feel like, man, I really have not read enough, right? But there's no way, there's no way to be an expert on the history of every single country or every single region or every single part of philosophy or something like that. And so we can see, as people will talk about, the idea of cope, right? We can cope with this level of complexity by searching for, simple maxims, simple rules, and simple dogmas that we can hold on to. So a classic example, right, is within Christianity, where, all we got to know is Jesus is good and everything that's bad comes from Satan, right? And so, like, when there's bad stuff happening in the world, all you have to say is that, well, here comes Satan again, right? Satan's doing bad stuff, right? And the more complicated things can be, instead of trying to, understand's maybe not the right word, But, instead of trying to grasp and be open, trying to be open to this complexity and trying to make our own thought and our own interpretations more complex, instead we double down on simplicity. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be political, right? It's not even, or, religious or whatever. It's more just like, let me focus on my routines, right? Let me focus on my enclosed little world where, the things that happen outside, maybe I'll watch it on TV, right? Maybe I'll watch the news sometimes. Maybe I'll read, a little bit of the New York Times, or I'll read Breitbart, or I don't know what people do these days. But, we try to keep the world at bay, right? We either try to keep it at bay by not thinking about it, or by thinking about it within, a way of thinking which is remaining rigid. We're refusing to change, right? We're refusing to be open to the fact that, sweeping change is here. It's happening. And actually, we are changing, but we're trying to resist this, right? We're trying to swim against the river. So in that respect, I really see, again, a connection between, all of us, right? Like, we are all in the position of being sort of like the lower level, and really everybody within the military, as described by Ben Zweibelson, right? Sort of locked into Newtonian, straightforward ABC type thinking, when in reality, the world is complex. The world is nonlinear, right? And these are the sorts of things that it is so important for us to start to be open to. This is not the kind of thing I can do an adequate job of, talking about within an hour. So I really encourage you to go check out, Ben Zweibelson's book. And, I've also posted a link to some of the Baudrillard quotes. I'm going to update the Substack post after the show as well. So keep checking that out. Again, that's the Experimental Unit Substack. You can find that on wrfg.org on the Solution Space site. So now I'm going to keep moving with some of these quotes from Ben Zweibelson. They're kind of long, but, that's just the par for the course here. So here's another quote by Ben Zweibelson. We often hesitate to realize the vastness of nonlinear patterns in complex security contexts because we do not feature the technical language of complexity theory in our decision-making methodologies. So, yeah, there's some big words here, but basically, in the way that we normally do things, we don't feature, we don't regularly remind ourselves about complexity. We just think about, like, well, there's an enemy, right? There's terrorism, there's black identity extremism, there's, whatever, and we're gonna fight it, right? And we got missiles, and we're gonna send the drones and kill the people who were bad. That's often like the way we might think about things. But in reality, like, in terms of, what it says here, complex security context, the threat is not so clean. I mean, there's no United States of America, right? But from the perspective of the quote unquote U.S. military, the problem, right, is there's not just one enemy. It's not just China, and even China is not one thing, right? There's no China in the same way there's no United States of America. All of these things are complex systems, right? It'll be maybe another, I don't know. It'll maybe be another article that I post on the Substack as part of the reading materials for this episode. There's something called systems destruction warfare, which has been pioneered by China, but obviously the United States is thinking along, or quote unquote, these countries, whatever, are thinking along similar lines, where it's like the enemy is not just like a thing, it's a complex system. It's a complex system of systems. And again, in reality, like, we are all complex systems. You can think about the different organ systems of the body as being themselves complex systems, right? I mean, the liver, right? The liver is itself made up of a bunch of cells, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. But the liver is itself only one part of an organ. I forget which, is that the endocrine system? Probably not. Digestive system? I forget. But, so even as complicated as an organ is, it's still only part of a larger organ system, right? And those systems all work together within our bodies. And they can't even really cleanly be differentiated from each other, because it's like, how does the nervous system work without the digestive system, right? The digestive system does the work of supplying the nervous system with nutrients, right? And not just like, there's a door between them, right? But I mean, every single cell within the nervous system has to be supplied with energy and with oxygen. And so the respiratory system and the digestive system and the nervous system and all these systems, they're all interpenetrating, right? They're interpenetrating within us. And it's to the point, we don't really understand what we are. Luckily, I don't have to understand what I am in order to talk. Otherwise, I'd never get anywhere, right? But so part of the thing that Afropessimism, for example, is talking about is that, we try to cut off that complexity. We try to cut off, the radical uncertainty that goes along with that. We experience that as ontological terror. And from the way I look at it, maybe you can hear, like, I'm the kind of person people would call white or whatever. I don't look at it as a moral issue, right? The problem is not that, white people are bad, or that, white people in the past even were evil. That's not the way that I choose to look at it. I know obviously a lot of people sort of like to play the blame game, or people say that things in the past shouldn't have happened or something like that. But I don't really look at it that way, because again, I see things as being tied together. And so if I'm going to accept my current position, if I'm going to be grateful for the present moment, for this privilege, LOL, to be able to speak into this microphone right now, that means I've got to be grateful for everything. And so the question is really not about, how did we get here and who's to blame and all these things. The question is, what are we going to do going forward, right? But so, given the fact that, it's not just white people or whatever, but, we have been within a military mode for thousands of years, right? This started way before, the whole idea of white people was a twinkling in I don't know, in whoever's eye, right? Before, anybody even thought of white people, we were already in this mode where war is what matters, because we have already, as hominids or whatever, we hunted animals to extinction. We invented spears. We spread ourselves over the whole world. And now the problem is, wherever you go, there's going to be more people there, and they might attack you, right? And even within your own tribe, your own nation, as that grows up, the idea of a city and whatever, these empires that arise, how are you going to maintain order, right? How are you going to maintain peace, right? There's always the threat of civil war. There's always the uncertainty about what other people want, and maybe they'll kill you while you're asleep and things of this nature. And so we have been very channeled into trying to, internalize simplistic ideas, because this cuts down on uncertainty. And if we can trust, quote unquote, if we can trust that other people, if we think that we know what other people's motivations are, then at least we can try and, set up incentive structures, right? To where there's not going to, bad parts of complexity, right, can be mitigated through what's called the law, right? I mean, Hammurabi's code, right? Eye for an eye. If you kill somebody, you're going to be killed, right? So if you can think that somebody, cares about being alive, then you can be like, oh, well, they probably won't murder me because then they'll be killed, and things of this nature. So that, long story short, as that has continued to expand, this idea of empire, and we've had larger and larger empires, this has reached a point of a global state of imperialism. And so whiteness and Europeanness is, are watchwords which are associated with, the advent of global imperium, right? So, the point is not, white people are the most evil people of all time. The point is, white people, we are, we are the agents of the globalization of empire, which is also the globalization of ontological terror, and the creation of more and more, larger and larger sort of structures of power, which imply that, more and more, very simplistic ideas are going to have to be pushed on people. And so this is sort of the projection of ontological terror, taking all of our fear and uncertainty and, I have to act like a big, strong policeman or a big, strong, politician or whatever. But it's like Bob Dylan says, right? In It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, right? He says, even the president of the United States sometimes must have to stand naked, right? But we don't like to do that, right? We don't want to stand naked. You know, we're ashamed. We're ashamed of our fragility. We're ashamed of, you know, our lack of complete understanding. And so we project that shame. We project our fear onto Black people, or onto queer people, or onto women, or even onto men, right? You know, it's not just, you know, I would like to intervene on the sort of woke discourse where, you know, it's actually not just marginalized categories that you can project ontological terror onto. This sort of ontological terror can be projected onto anything, including the CIA, right? Have you ever associated ontological terror, you know, with intelligence agencies? I think that's a pretty common thing. But anyways, I'm well overdue for playing another PSA for y'all. So let's see, which one was it? Here we go. I'll see you on the other side of this.
Hey everybody, it's Moby. I wanted to introduce you guys to an interview series that I've been working on the last couple of months. Hero really is just a collection of interviews where I've gotten a chance to sit across the table from those that are making serious impacts in their communities. Please be sure to tune in on Thursday, February 22nd, 4 to 5 p.m. as episode 2 airs on WRFG 89.3 FM radio.
Welcome back. You are listening to Solution Space. They call me, quote unquote, Adam Stephen Wadley with a PH. Again, go to if you'd like to, you can go to wrfg.org, find the Solution Space page, find a link to our Substack, and enter a whole new world of imagination, and connect if you'd like. If you have any feedback that you'd like to give, feel free to call in right now. Telephone number here is 404-523-8989, 404-523-8989. No callers today. That's all right. So continuing on with some of this, Ben Zweibelson, going to run through some more quotes for you. Ben Zweibelson writes that linear causal relationships, of course, exist in reality, but only in simplistic contexts, and rarely can be associated with broader complexity. This inclination to standardize military decision-making into linear causal constructs extends from human enterprises in general, and according to Joseph Lampel and Henry Mintzberg, is ultimately rooted in the wish to simplify the world and make our frameworks as general as possible. We seek to tame the chaos of war just enough to permit our decision-making methodology to function. So this is very powerful because this idea of chaos is, again, also invoked in Afropessimism. You know, the idea, again, being that, you know, the way in which we conceive of order has a lot to do with anti-blackness. And so the idea there, you know, again, to go over it again, is that, and also to put it in the terms here laid out by Ben Zweibelson, you know, this idea of simplifying the world and making our frameworks as general as possible, you know, something like white supremacy or manifest destiny, right? Or American exceptionalism, right? Like these are the sorts of ideologies that combine, you know, an idea of what's going on in history with like a special idea of people. It's in a way, American exceptionalism is very similar to the idea of chosen people, right, within Judaism. But, you know, what I think is so interesting is that, you know, that sort of pattern repeats itself again and again. You know, and I'm already a little bit self-conscious because, you know, this is the kind of thinking that would, you know, drive many people into anti-Semitism, right? Where it's like, you know, it's Judaism's fault or something like that, you know, that this sort of tendency is common, that people will, you know, try and respond to a complex situation, and either the situation of being downtrodden, or feeling marginalized, and then also the experience of being imperial and, you know, meting out death, you know, killing people, taking their land and colonizing and stuff, and wanting to justify that, right? And so in both cases, you know, whether you are, you know, feeling marginalized on the verge of death, you know, feeling inconsequential, or you are acting out this violence, in both cases, you know, this story about how, you know, we're special, right? And we are at the center of everything. That is a kind of thing, that is one example of this idea of simplifying the world and making our frameworks as general as possible, right? So in terms of that, it's like, as general as possible. It's like American exceptionalism can be, or America first, right, can be your answer to everything, right? It's like, what should we do about the border? Oh, we'll send those people away. We only care about the people within America, right? What should we do about China? Well, we should probably conquer China because, you know, they're bad because they don't have democracy, because they're not America, because America's the best, right? What should we do about Russia? You know, well, you know, Russia's also bad because they're not us and we're the best, right? So it's like my way or the highway, and I have every intention of making it my way, right? So, you know, this, there's so many different ways of looking at this. And crucially, I think I would also mention, you know, as I was saying before, in terms of the relationship between this and, you know, sort of like wokeism or something like that, I think gender is a really interesting place to talk about this, because you know, people will talk about the importance of, you know, seeing that gender and sex are not just binaries. You know, plenty of people, quote unquote, identify in ways where, you know, they don't identify as being a male or a female, a man or a woman, for example. But then, you know, there's an interesting, or something which is interesting to me, which is a sort of critique of this, which is to say, like, but what does man and woman mean? Like, if part of what gender philosophy, the philosophy of gender, might be trying to teach us is that, you know, we just have stereotypes about what it means to be a man or a woman. So, like, we receive from our society, from inherited wisdom or whatever, you know, this is another example of this simplification, right? You know, girls wear dresses and boys don't wear dresses, right? So now you want to be, I'm a boy, right? And I'm going to wear a dress, right? Does that mean that I'm not a boy anymore? Or does that mean that, you know, the idea of what a man is, you know, that has become too rigid? And like, there's no problem with a man wearing a dress. It doesn't necessarily make you a girl. And so this is applied because people get very anxious when it comes to children, you know, where it's a boy, he likes to play with dolls. And in this day and age, you know, people might start to think, oh, well, maybe, you know, this boy is gender nonconforming or something like this. And basically where I think there is some interesting complexity to be had, you know, has to do with the ways in which even, you know, philosophies of gender, or, you know, basically, you know, people call woke or whatever, you know, the way in which, you know, we even try to question these sorts of, these sorts of entrenched concepts, we can wind up creating our own entrenched concepts. So that now, for example, you know, we'll have a male identity, we'll have a female identity. Now we have non-binary identity, and then we have like, you know, the profusion. You know, I don't, for me personally, to say what I'm trying to say here, this is also related to what Ben Zweibelson was saying, that he's talking about how the military will exclude those that threaten to disrupt or even dismantle concepts, including identity. So I think there's a way in which we don't have to identify, right? We don't have to associate ourselves with particular ways of thinking about things. So we can, at the same time as we can dismantle things, or, you know, aspire to, you know, free ourselves from, you know, being tethered to things like the idea of masculinity or femininity or things like that, or blackness or whiteness. You know, we can also see that, you know, trying to tie things back into, you know, well, a trans identity, you know, that is, in some cases, that can also be a new form of cognitive rigidity. It's a new form of dogma, basically. And it's important to understand that, you know, again, the reason why we often reach for these dogmas has to do with the fact that we feel under attack, right? Like this trans person who got beat up in their school bathroom and died, right? I mean, this is the kind of situation where, you know, people try to use, you know, this idea of a trans identity to talk about how, you know, there are people in society who, you know, are subject to being the targets of hate crimes. And this has got to go, right? But in terms of actually addressing the root causes of the issue, if you want to see some of that root cause as being that, you know, we're trying to hold together a simplistic idea of order, and when that doesn't work, we're finding scapegoats. You know, and within the Afropessimism, anyway, it's always in the back of my mind, but, you know, we are basically looking to project our ontological terror onto other people. And that is a way in which, we enter into violent situations. And it becomes life and death sorts of struggles. All right, so I've only got a few more minutes left here. So I'm going to read one more quote by Ben Zweibelson, which I think is especially related to Afropessimism. So Ben Zweibelson writes that modern military decision-making already carries a mechanistic payload of natural science and metaphoric devices, terminology, definitions, and systematic logic. These stem from natural science, and natural science-inspired theories on war. So Hominy, Clausewitz, Scharnhorst, Svetchin, Liddell Hart, Moltke. An industrialized, centralized, assembly line, Taylorism school of management, organizational constructs validated during both world wars. Complexity, chaos, and systems theories would only come later, well after JPP and NATO OPP structures became rigid and fixed. Okay. Joint structure acknowledges that due to complexity and constant change, commanders will never know everything about the given operational environment and will never be able to fully define its problems. As such, many of the problems in the operating environment may not have solutions. Uh-oh. But the point that I want to emphasize here is Ben Zweibelson mentioning that JPP, it's joint, I don't know what that means. But, NATO. I understand what NATO means, right? He's saying that NATO structures have become rigid and fixed, right? So what is NATO, right? Like NATO in the West, right, is the ascendant, the victors of European colonialism, right? You had Russia off to the side, but America was able to subsume Western Europe into its imperial core, right? And as well as Japan, right, through the application of nuclear weapons, and so the point is that the NATO way of thinking is rigid and fixed, and this is now dangerous for us all because this is the sort of rigid thinking which is being put into developing technologies. Hello drone program, hello artificial intelligence. And so the application of these sorts of rigid thinking are threatened to kill us all. Even the people in NATO, even the director of, Avril Haines is at risk. So will somebody go and see if Avril Haines is okay? Sorry, maybe I'm not supposed to say that. Anyway, the point is that, this sort of rigid thinking is a major danger in our world. And it's not enough for us just to, want our leaders to take care of the complexity, right? It's not about phoning your congressman. And to a certain extent, it's not even about, tweet tagging the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, right? The question is what we are doing internally, right? Because just the same way that in the military, Ben Zweibelson is advocating that, even people in the lower levels of the hierarchy or whatever, that everybody needs to be opened up more to things being complicated, to complexity, to being more tolerant of chaos and, appreciating and accepting that we might not ever be able to fully define the operating environment, which is to say the world, and so if we have to deal with a world that we can't define, if we have to accept, the fact that we can't define ourselves, if we have to be open to the fact that we can't define other people, this is the sort of transformation that, for me, seems to go along with the Afropessimist idea of the end of the world. So what seems exciting to me is that, this idea of the Afropessimist end of the world seems like, also one of the current horizons or the current horizon of the ongoing revolution in military affairs. And that also has to do with, the revolution that, the distinction between the military and everybody else, that's going bye-bye, right? And so we're all on the front lines, right? And so I've only got a few seconds left, but, from me to you, heart to heart, experimental uniteer to another, best of luck dealing with all of this. Until next week. jeez.